So, shalom and welcome to this beautiful study of the book of Galatians. I just saw I have a typo right there. But anyhow, yes, I need to actually stop my share because this is not the slide that I needed to show. Give me a second, guys. What I wanted to say is the following. Um, when I first began my walk, well, I don't want to say with the Most High. When I began my walk in diving in scriptures, like literally opening every page, reading from cover to cover, and wanting to do precept upon precept, I had this desire and hunger to do all that it was written, to do all of the commandments, right? To begin observing the feast days and to eat clean as the word commands. And I remember coming across Galatians, and I'm not gonna lie, it was very, I don't want to say confusing, but it created like unnecessary weight. Let's just say that. Because of the fact that I was so clear with the rest of the scriptures. And I remember how this began. Actually, I'm gonna tell you how it began. This would give you a little bit of introduction why I decided to do this study for a second time. It all began with a friend of mine that was studying the word with me at the time. We were basically learning together. And so we were sharing with each other videos, teachings, and whatnot. And everything was just on point with what we had been studying in the word from beginning to end. But then one preaching that he came across, he went ahead and sent it to me, and the preaching did mention the foolish Galatians, and you know how Paul basically reprimanded them and said, who has bewitched you? And I mean, I remember having read Galatians in the past, but never truly in context and never truly like, the whole book really. And so that teaching left me with like a bad taste, and I went and I studied Galatians, and I was just like, Abba, I'm confused. I don't want to say I'm confused, but I know your word does not contradict itself. What is going on here? Because this is a little bit challenging. And then after that, I remember a lot of people, because when I then started voicing out on social media, how I believed in the whole Bible, basically a whole Bible approach, and how I believed the law was not done away with, that it remains forever. And obviously, everybody and their mamas would come at me with Galatians, always quoting from Galatians, always the same few Bible verses. I don't know if it's just me, if it only happened to me, but it was just like that one book that was thrown at me constantly, to the point where I was like, okay, Abba, I'm going to study this book and I want answers like from you. I don't want to look at my Bible, my study Bible notes, because all of that leads to the hyper grace message, right? I don't want to look at anybody's teaching or interpretation on this. I want you to speak to me, please. And I remember just asking. And it's so funny because I prayed this, and not even like 2 weeks later, I remember some person that I honestly, like, I began sharing at the beginning of this walk everybody that had to do with Torah. At the beginning, everything that said Torah, Torah keepers, Torah observant, whatever, I was like, follow, 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 right? But in that, I didn't really have relationships with people online. I was just following random accounts. But I do remember this one sister that I honestly never even took the time to look at her posts or anything other than me just following, posted something on her stories, saying something like, it was like a question mark, like, did you guys know that the law that Paul is referring to, she didn't even say Galatians, by the way, she just said like the law that Paul makes reference to in all of his letters, is not just the Torah. There's different laws. It's just been grouped under one law. All she did was that, like that and a question mark, something like that. I remember I screenshotted it, and then I was like, oh, I never thought about it that way. Well, long story short, I searched out the matter, I digged into it, and sure enough, um, I discovered a whole new world of possibilities. No, I don't want to say possibilities, but a whole new world of interpretations of Paul's letters based on that one question that she posted, which to me wasn't a question, it was an answer for the Most High. Because I was so stuck on that, like, but Abba, like, I understand where Paul is coming from, but it's not really like adding on to everything else in scriptures. Like, what do I do? And like, again, and in that, I was coming across obviously teachings and whatever of people that were just rejecting Paul altogether, rejecting his letters altogether, like Galatians specifically. And so even with that, I did not feel peace because I was like, but, you know? So I give this introduction to you tonight because what I'm going to say is this. Just as I prayed and I was not content with what I was finding at the time, I encourage you, whether live with me tonight or catching the replay later, I encourage you to pray and to search out the matter for yourself with the help of your Ruach. I mean, his Ruach, which is in you, the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, which will guide you to all truth and will lead you to all truth. I do want to say the following. I don't have all the answers. I've read this book probably, I want to say at least 5 times already. And yet I'm still discovering new things. Even putting together, again, I had done this study, I want to say like a couple years back, maybe 3 years back. Um, and I obviously, it was clear to me. I was able to see through it. And I was like, thank you, Abba, for answering. And I was content with that. Then I later wrote like a synopsis of what I had put together, like precept upon precept, shared it on social media and whatnot. Um, Shared it with back then I was still like in a Christian church, shared it with even the pastor of the church at that time. And I remember translating it into Spanish just so people could see it, you know. And I was just making prints and copies and just giving it to everybody because I was so excited with what the Most High, I believe the Most High has showed me, and I wanted people to see and open their eyes. But I decided to do the study once again, and even studying, restudying, and going back. Yes, I see how the Most High did open my eyes then, but He continues opening them today. And I was even able to see new things which I hadn't back then. And why do I share all this? Just to show you that learning never ends. And just to show you that, yes, even though Abba might have used me back then to bring about clarity, He's still teaching me today. And there were things that I was like, oh, wait, okay, there's more to this, you know? So I'm just saying, ladies, whether you are watching later or whatnot, don't think that this is it. Like, this is the only interpretation and there's nothing else. Because again, we are always growing from milk to meat and we are always learning. All I am doing is attempting to guide you into connecting all the context of the Bible together to see the bigger picture of what Paul was making reference to when he would speak about the law, specifically in this letter to the Galatians. So having said that, let me just check the chat really quick. Okay, perfect. And then let's continue. Today I aim to cover just the first 2 chapters of Galatians. By the way, I don't envision it taking too long the next few weeks. However, maybe today will take a little longer because I do want to give a brief introduction to the book itself so that we have a basis to start with. And if I go too fast, please, lady, interrupt me, put it on the chat. Feel free to unmute yourselves, ask questions, and participate because this is not a one-man show, or should I say woman show. It's a community effort, and we're coming in one accord, as the word tells us to. So let's begin. So the Galatians, again, had received the gospel of Messiah. This is a church that Paul had been equipping, let's just say that, and helping them to grow in maturity, okay? So he quotes in this letter, it was before your eyes that Messiah was publicly portrayed as crucified. So obviously these Galatians, these people from Galatia, had witnessed Messiah, maybe not perhaps in person, but at one point or another, they were part of the movement of seeing what Messiah had done. Yasha HaMashiach, being born, been born through a woman and dying and then being raised from the dead. They were witnesses of that, whether again through Paul or Peter or any other leader from the church. So he had clearly become atonement, meaning Messiah, right? So they knew that. He was the lamb that took the place over any animal sacrifice, which this is a connection with Passover, right? And they had witnessed it. The Levitical system was therefore no longer under effect, and the Galatians had understood and received this message. However, they had been going back to performing, and this is the key, right? They had been bewitched into believing that what Messiah had done on the stake was not enough. So I encourage you, ladies, tonight to dive into the word with me, as I said earlier, as we see Paul's stance on defending the gospel and how it has been widely misunderstood. Give me 1 second, ladies. Sorry, I had a minor interruption here. Okay, so where was I? So when it comes to understanding any book in scriptures, and again, this is like very repetitive. If you've been following me on social media, or if you know me at all or have joined studies with me, this is something that I say over and over and over again, that when it comes to studying any books in scriptures, it is imperative to have the whole context of the Bible, right? For it to make sense to us. But in particularly, it's when studying any of Paul's letters, it is actually of the most significant importance to understand the Torah. Why? Because it is what Paul quoted basically in all his letters, and we're going to see that. But not just that, but Paul's letters are the only letters that come with a warning from Peter, one of the 12, which we will get into shortly. But before we read on Peter's warning regarding Paul's letters, let's analyze who was Peter and what was his assignment given by Messiah himself. So let's begin. Why do I bring up Peter? We know that Peter was chosen to open the gate, so to speak, to the gospel going forth to the Gentile world, aka the scattered northern kingdom. A lot of people I'm going to pause right there because a lot of people will think of Paul being the one that was to bring the gospel to the Gentiles. But we know that Peter was also, as we read in the book of Acts, Peter's the one that's given the vision of the unclean animals. And when the Most High tells Peter, kill and eat, and he's like, I could never eat something unclean. Like, why are you telling me to do this? Obviously, I'm paraphrasing, right? Later on, the Most High shows him that it was a vision in regards to Cornelius, who happened to be a Gentile. And so he was already preparing him so that he would go into his home and not to call him what the Most High had declared clean, to call him unclean. So as we see, and this is found in Acts 10. So again, we know that his mission is later to also picked up by Paul and according with Messiah's will. And we know that Peter, and again, when I say the scattered northern kingdom, what I am referring to is the house of Israel. We have the southern kingdom, which is the house of Judah, and the northern kingdom, which is the house of Israel. And we know that the house of Judah did go back after captivity into Jerusalem, but the scattered northern kingdom never went back to the land. And we do see all these groups scattered, yes, even in Galatia, even in Rome, even in, and again, you see James, for example, addressing his letter to the dispersed of the house of Israel, scattered among, abroad. We also see Peter. I'm gonna show you now, but I'm just off the bat letting you know so that you understand. So again, who was Peter's audience? Peter addressed his letters to those who are elect exiles of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. So again, we see Galatia in this letter. And you can, well, I'm going to show you later, but this is found in the first book of Peter, in the very first chapter, in the very first verse. He, off the bat, shows you who is he addressing, right? So this is important to keep that in mind. So when we are later addressing the issue that Paul has with even Peter himself. So from this, we see that it was very likely that Peter's audience was mostly made up of believers who were most likely traced back to the northern kingdom, like I mentioned before. We also see the fact that Peter describes their former life as one of ignorance and futility inherited from their forefathers. And that's found in 1 Peter 1, 14 and 18. And that is exactly what I'm making reference to, because we see that these people were actually, you could trace them back to Israel, to the forefathers of Israel, of the house of Israel. So Peter's use of exilic topic is actually a strategic way to identify his audience with the lost tribes of the house of Israel. In doing so, we see that he is helping them see that they are indeed part of Abraham's family, and that now through Messiah, they have access to come back into the covenant that had been broken. So any questions up to this point or any comments, please feel free to interrupt. But yes, it is very important to understand the audience of these letters. I know I'm talking about Paul right here in Galatians, but I do want to bring Peter, because Peter is referenced not only within the book of Galatians, but as we can see in 2 Peter, which is the second letter that Peter does to the same people, we see him speaking in regards to Paul. So let's read. This is what I was mentioning of before. I'm not going to read it again, but you can find it in 1 Peter 1 through 2. Where Peter addresses, to whom Peter is addressing this letter. And then we have at the end of his letter to the same group of people here, which includes again Galatia, what he is writing to them. So let's read. This is 2 Peter 3, 14 through 17. I don't know why I put a 14 here. That was a typo. I'm sorry. So it's 14 through 17. So therefore, beloved, since you are waiting for these, be diligent to be found by him without spot or blemish and at peace. And count the patience of our Adon as salvation, just as our beloved brother Paul also wrote to you according to the wisdom given him, as he does in all his letters when he speaks in them of these matters. So we see right there that he's talking about, I am aware that our beloved brother Paul, do notice the verbiage that Peter is using. He's not addressing Paul as someone who is a false prophet or a false teacher or any of that matter. He's addressing him as someone who is welcomed by him, beloved brother Paul. So that's something right there that you must pay attention to before you want to go and disregard everything that Paul ever did, okay, or said. So again, Peter addresses his brother Paul and reminds the same people that Paul also did write to them. Okay, let's see what he says. Verse 16. As he does in all his letters when he speaks of them of these matters. These are some things, there are some things in them that are hard to understand. Now this is key right here, which the ignorant and unstable twist to their own destruction, as they do the other scriptures. And again, we know that the other scriptures Peter was making reference of here is the Tanakh, or the Old Testament, because at this point, the New Testament had not been written yet. Remember, these were just letters that these disciples were writing to the churches, to the congregations, right? So again, he's telling them the ignorant and unstable twist to their own destruction as they do the other scriptures, meaning they're ignorant in the word, okay? Verse 17, you therefore, beloved, knowing this beforehand, and I believe, even though he's writing to the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, he's also speaking to us. So therefore, beloved, knowing this beforehand, take care that you're not carried away with the error of lawless people and lose your own stability. So with that introduction, I want to begin, because it is very easy to grab Paul's letters and say, he said, we don't have to abide by the law any longer. We don't have to observe no feast days, no Shabbat days, nothing. It has all been done away with. As a matter of fact, he nailed that to the cross. We are under a new covenant. Ooh, and they'll throw all types of weird chanting at you, right? When it comes to regards to Paul's letters, because apparently the whole doctrine is made out of Paul's letters. And so I do want to add this because it is so important to understand that there's a warning even for Paul's letters, that if you don't know the rest of the scriptures, you're going to be carried away with the era of lawless people if you are going based on what Galatians says and not understanding a word of what Paul was making reference to. And again, I believe this is the part where the Most High calls us to go from milk to meat. There is a maturity process that takes place in every believer when we come to him. Yes, at the beginning, I might have started in the book of Galatians or Colossians or, I don't know, Romans, and understood it completely wrong, right? But there's been grace with that because I didn't know any better. But that's why he calls us to study to show ourselves approved. As I began my journey studying the matter and putting precept upon precept, line upon line, here a little, there a little, as Isaiah commands us to do, or better yet, the Most High through Isaiah commands us to do, I realized that all it is a matter of immaturity in the faith. When we come to this walk, we are to let go of all pre-existing knowledge. Yes, even if it seems right, even if it felt good, even if you felt like, no, but I prayed and he answered me. Listen, not everything that you hear comes from him, even though it might sound like him. I want to say this. A lot of times we pray for things, right? And we say, oh, but God told me, right? I felt it in my ruach. I felt it in my spirit. Now, what I'm going to tell you is the following. His voice is never going to contradict his own voice. And what is his own voice? The word written. His word written. And again, it's never going to contradict it. And I don't mean by this one little Bible verse that you took from Matthew and another one from Galatians and another one from Colossians. I'm talking about his word is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And that equals, it's the same in Genesis, it's the same in Deuteronomy, it's the same in Joshua, it's the same even in Judges, it's the same in Kings, it's the same in Matthew, and it's the same in the letters of Paul, the same as in the book of Revelation, forever. And so understand that before we dive in, that we are not being carried away with the error of lawless people by not knowing scriptures. Let's continue. All right. Yes, Hosea 4:6. Thank you. I had that in my mind, actually. Thank you, Yasmin. Hosea 4:6. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge, because thou hast rejected knowledge. I will also reject thee, that thou shalt be no priest to me. Seeing that thou hast forgotten the law of thy Elohim, I will also forget thy children. And that is, whew, I fear that. I do not want him to forget me nor my children. And so in that we study to show ourselves approved, and so that we don't forsake his law. We don't forsake his commandments. Amen. Abba never changes. Yes, yes, yes. All right. So background on the book. All right. So this book was written to the assembly of Galatia. And I'm going to show you guys again, something that I learned this time around that I was like mind blown. And I was even like, thank you, Abba, for the never ending knowledge that you continue to just entrust us with. And I'm excited to share. Again, I'm not saying that I'm right, but I am going to leave it up to you to decide, because let's see who Galatia was composed of, right? So let's continue. Its name comes from the people who lived there. Formerly Gauls, the Galatians practiced the Celtics religion with Druids as their high priests. In addition to this pagan influence, Paul battled Pharisaic Jews who insisted that salvation could be achieved only through the levitical sacrificial system. And again, this right here is the context of the entire book. Right here. I can summarize it with this right there. That is the context, but we're going to break it down. Consequently, not only did Paul have the challenge of convincing a pagan people of the good news of Messiah, but he did so in an environment of hostility from his rival Jews. It is for this reason the narrative often changes in Galatians from teaching justification apart from law to abstaining from pagan days, months, and times practiced by the relocated Gauls. And again, why do I say I want to show you guys something? Because yes, they were formerly Gauls, and yes, I believe they were observing pagan practices. However, I do believe that at the time that Paul wrote the letter to the Galatians, the specific group of people that he wrote to were not like just Galatians, meaning Gentiles, like I mentioned earlier. I believe they were from the scattered tribes of the house of Israel. And they did have some foreknowledge of what his Torah entailed, which is why I believe later that he calls them who bewitched you. Like, you guys knew this already. But anyhow, all right, so in that, I'm going to introduce something that I learned recently, and this is a northern or southern Galatians theory, and I'm going to explain what that is. And I'm sure you're going to be like, what in the world is this? Like, what? Northern or southern? Basically, northern Galatia or southern Galatia, right? Let's see. So the context and background of Galatia is extremely important. Luke's Acts, so meaning the book of Acts, which is written by Luke, right? Chapter 16. By the way, this one is super weird, the way this font made it look, but that's a one. So 16 verse 6 and chapter 18, 23 is our principal external witness surrounding to the event, the composition of the text of Galatians. Are Paul and Luke's Galatians the same people? Luke used local designation for cities and places, so his Galatians seem to be ethnic Galatians living in the northern Galatians. So this is key. It seems like every time Luke would write in regards of the Galatians, it was referring to more to the Celtic people that were found in the northern region of Galatia. Okay? Are you guys understanding that so far? So Paul, on the other hand, used Roman provincial names and designations, so his Galatians would seem to be those living in the southern province. Not understanding that there are two theories, you will read over Acts 15 and assume it occurred prior to the book of Galatians. And again, I'm not saying that this is, the final answer to this, but the more I studied it and the more I read through it, and I will do it with you guys together, it does seem as although the Bible, my Bible, like quotes, you're even going to see it like in the NKJV, it makes reference to Acts 15 when we're reading from Galatians 2, for example. However, having these two theories and these distinctions that I'm about to show you guys, I kind of beg to differ. And it seems as if Acts 15 was written after Galatians was addressed. The book, like the Church of Galatians was addressed by Paul. I'm going to show you, ladies. I know it might be like a lot, but okay. So basically, I put here the northern theory. That's what that is. Northern theory equals Luke, and or not equals, but like it's referenced by Luke, and then the southern theory, which is more addressed by Paul. So the northern, right, assumes Paul delivered the decree from Acts 15 to the Galatians, and we see that in Acts 16:4. Now, the southern theory states basically that Paul wasn't writing to ethnic Galatians, but to believers who lived in the Roman province in Galatia prior to the Acts 15 Jerusalem Council. In case you guys are not familiar with the Acts 15, let me just give you a little bit of a context with that. The Acts 15 Jerusalem Council is basically the part in scriptures where Paul comes with Barnabas to the Peter and James and the rest of the Jerusalem Council in regards to the group of people from Galatia that were being told to get circumcised. And basically he said they're putting a yoke on their necks, like what do we do? And so Peter and James make the decision to send a letter to the Galatians, basically stating like, you don't have to do this. However, you start by reading the Sabbath, reading the Torah every Sabbath, and continue doing these things like abstaining from idols, from eating things with blood in it, etc., etc. We'll kind of go briefly through it, but just giving you a little bit of context of that. So, in other words, the Southern theory basically stating that Acts 15 happened after the wait, what am I saying? That prior to the Acts 15 Jerusalem Council is that Paul had written to the Galatians, right? So Galatians 4:14, it shows that he had a physical ailment that would not have allowed him to traverse those mountains, meaning the northern mountains that he would have had to traverse if he was addressing the northern part of Galatia. But that's just a theory. Again, I just put that in parentheses there. I'm just adding what I found, but it's a theory. But it's worth considering it. That's all I'm saying. Now let's continue. So we see here, there's a contrast between Galatians 2 and Acts 15. And again, I'm going to go through it briefly before we read obviously we are going to read the chapters together, but I do want to give you again the context ahead of time. So Galatians 2 basically says that Paul went up to Jerusalem by revelation. And again, we're going to read it together, but Acts 15 states that Paul was sent by the congregation in Antioch. Now, Galatians 2 says Paul was accompanied by Titus. In Acts 15, some others accompanied Paul, not Titus. Titus is not even mentioned, by the way, in the Acts 15 account. Galatians 2, the leadership included John in the Galatians 2, right? In Acts 15, John isn't even mentioned. I don't know if you guys recall, it was only Peter and James. So we have in Galatians 2, the meeting was private. In Acts 15, the meeting was very public. In Galatians 2, no decrees are mentioned. And in Acts 15, the decrees is the whole context of the chapter. Obviously, they sent a whole letter after, the result came about. So Galatians 2:1 refers to Paul's relief mission in Acts 11:29. That's what is believed by the Southern theory, right? We see Paul later visits Galatia in Acts 13 through 14. So it might have been that. So again, I wanted to show you ladies that before we begin, because I believe it's going to bring more clarity. So having said that, can anyone read chapter 1?
I can read.
Thank you.
Let me close the door. Okay.
And read the whole chapter.
Whole chapter.
This one is short. We're going to read through it, yeah.
Okay, sounds good. Okay. Paul, an apostle, not from men nor from man, but through Yahshua HaMashiach and Elohim the Father, who raised him from the dead, and all the brethren who are with me, to the churches of Galatia. Grace to you and peace from Elohim the Father and our Lord Yahshua HaMashiach, who gave himself for our sins that he might deliver us from this present evil age according to the will of our Father, our God and Father. To him be the glory forever and ever. Amen. I marvel that you are turning away so soon from him who called you in the grace of Yahshua HaMashiach to a different gospel, which is not another, but there are some who trouble you and want to pervert the gospel of Yeshua. But even if we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel to you than what we preach to you, let him be accursed. As we have said, so now I say again, if anyone preaches any other gospel to you than what you have received, let him be accursed. For do I now persuade men or Elohim? For do I seek to please men? For if I still please men, I would not be a bondservant of Yeshua. But I make known to you, brethren, that the gospel which was preached by me is not according to man. For I neither received it from man, nor was I taught it. But it came through the revelation of Yeshua HaMashiach. For you have heard my former conduct in Judaism. Now I persecuted the church of Elohim beyond measure and tried to destroy it. I advanced in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries in my own nation, being more exceedingly zealous of the traditions of my fathers. But when it pleased the Elohim, who separated me from my mother's womb and called me through his grace, to reveal his Son in me, that I might preach him among the Gentiles, and I did not immediately confer with flesh and blood, nor did I go to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me, but I went to Arabia, and returned again to Damascus. Then after 3 years I went to Jerusalem to see Peter and remained with him 15 days. But I saw none of the apostles except James, the Most High's brother. Now concerning the things which I write to you, indeed, before Elohim, I do not lie. After I went into the regions of Syria and Cilicia, and I was unknown by the face of the churches of Judea, which were in Yasha HaMashiach. But they were hearing only, he who formerly persecuted us now preaches the faith which he once tried to destroy. They glorified Elohim in me.
I mean, okay, so right there, everything that I was telling you, what we see, this is the beginning chapter for this letter. And we see that he's basically giving some background, like, I'm writing to you, this gospel was given to me not according to men, but according to the Most High, et cetera, et cetera. We know that, right? We will break all this down later, but I did want to point out the following. So we see that he makes mention here when he went after 3 years to Jerusalem to see Peter and remained with him, and he saw no one of the other apostles except James. And we see that he is relating this account that this had taken place, but this is not the time that he went for the Jerusalem council. This is basically when he went to meet with them when he had the encounter, like after he had the encounter with Messiah. As we saw earlier here, it says that he remained where is it? In Arabia. I think it was in verse 17, that he had gone up to Arabia immediately after. You see, it says, I did not immediately confirm with flesh and blood, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me, but I went to Arabia and returned to Damascus. And then it wasn't after that then he went and met with Peter and James. But this time was not the Jerusalem council still. Okay. So now let me give you a little bit of background on Paul before we do the connecting precepts. Because we read on Paul. Paul always gives, himself a standing ovation entrance in all his letters. This is me and this is my life. He gives a biography, basically, right? So who is Paul? Well, before I say who is Paul, scriptural significance here. While there are several important themes in this book, perhaps the most crucial is a correct understanding of justification apart from works. Keep that in mind, okay? Justification is not awarded or earned based on works or obedience. If this were the case, the Messiah would be of no profit, as we later see Paul stating in Galatians 5:2. However, it's equally important to realize that the law found in the book of the covenant is not against the promises of Messiah, which we will see next week in Galatians 3:21. The purpose of faith and justification is to bring us to a state of sanctification, a life set apart through obedience to the Most High's laws and commandments. And I'm giving you the scriptural significance now, so you keep that in mind when we start diving in. So now going back to Paul's background, who was Paul? Paul, I know all of you should know by now, but Paul was a scholar trained by Gamaliel, who was a Pharisee. He was actually a Pharisee of Pharisees, right? He excelled in his study of the oral laws of Judaism. This is very important to understand as basis, as most believers aren't even aware that the oral laws of Judaism exist, let alone they study them. And because of that, we can conclude that virtually all 21st century students of Scripture cannot claim to be learned regarding Paul's writings. We are willingly and wholly naive historically concerning Paul's audience if we don't even know some basic information about the context of Paul's writings. Isn't it arrogant to believe that we know what Paul is talking about and what he was teaching, and that he was teaching a no-law doctrine? Because that's basically what the church has been teaching for, I don't know, I want to say for the past at least 1,000 years. It goes way back when, way back when. And again, it is very important, extremely important to understand, just like that lady that had posted in her stories that one time after me praying and seeking the answers from the Most High. She said, did you know there's more than one law that Paul makes reference to, and they are grouped into just law, the word law? Well, there is indeed. And you're going to see that. And there's actually examples of that even within his letters, because if not, then it would seem as Paul's letters are truly like he is, how do you say when you have this disorder, schizophrenic. Like he has schizophrenia. If you don't understand the distinction between these different types of laws that he makes reference to in his letters, you're gonna read his letters and be like, make up your mind, Paul. Like, what the heck? Like, you'll have him say in one verse, like, the law serves for nothing and it's nailed to the cross, for example, and a few verses down, should then we not keep the law? Absolutely not, by no means, God forbid, like so it's like, make up your mind, Paul, right? So is it really that he was schizophrenic, or is it really that we're not studying enough to understand and interpret this? Again, scripture interprets itself with scripture, and we know that also we've had the scribes involved in our translations, and so because of that, our translations have been very watered down to the point where they've grouped all the laws together in one word. Okay, so first, and that is the main one that we're going to find in this letter to the Galatians, is the Jewish law. Okay, actually no, not the main one. The main one that is addressed is the Levitical law, but we'll make distinction when we come across them. So the Jewish law, these are the oral laws of Judaism that came as a result of the added fences by men in order to enforce the people to observe the Torah, as we see in the book of Nehemiah. This is the law that the Pharisees observed, today found in the Talmud, and it is just this law that Messiah was so against. Okay? Again, we see Paul making reference a lot to this law in Galatians, but he also makes reference to the Most High's and the Levitical law. So number 2, the Most High's law, which is, we know, the Torah, or what is found within the book of the covenant, not the book of the law. And that is something that it's hard for even people walking in Torah, believe it or not, to understand. Again, we are supposed to study and ask his Holy Spirit to lead us to rightly divide the word of truth. Why? Because there is a distinction between the book of the covenant and the book of the law. Yes, the book of the law was given to the Levites, but when we look at the distinction, for example, the book of the covenant was from the beginning, and we see that it was blood ratified even on Mount Sinai by faith, when the Israelites literally said, all these things that you said, we shall do. And this was right before the sin of the golden calf. And so right there, you see that there was a book of the covenant that was written and approved and sealed by blood. Now, after the sin of the golden calf, right? There was the book of the law that was given as a schoolmaster or a tutor who was temporarily guiding the people until Messiah would come and atone, because Abba knew, and let me tell you, Abba knew that there ain't no way that these people were gonna make it unless there was a tutor being placed temporarily to help these people at least try to stay set apart, at least try in the meantime. And we know, guys, if you study the word, we know that didn't even last too long. Heck, that they came right from Mount Sinai into the promised land with Joshua and Caleb, and shortly after, they're already breaking the covenant. Like, you see that did not last. And obviously through the book of Kings, etc., we see what befell upon them because of the fact that they continuously went back to worshiping other idols and basically being the unfaithful bride. And so because of that, obviously Messiah needed to come. So we know that the book of the law was a temporary covenant. That is something I'm telling you. Pray about it, seek Abba, seek his instructions and his guidance, because many, yes, even in the truth, everybody likes to call themselves nowadays, even, yes, keeping Torah, will hold on to the book of the law as if still remains today for us. And there's a distinction with these things. We know that, yes, the law is forever, but we have to understand that the schoolmaster or the tutor, the middleman, was removed when Messiah came. Now the law is, yes, there was to call it a modification, been added, because Messiah now takes on the Levitical priesthood. He is now the high priest under the order of Melchizedek, which was the original covenant, the book of the covenant. Are you guys understanding so far? Because I don't want to like confuse you. I just need you to understand these distinctions, because I personally believe is key to understand the rest of the letters. And even the whole Bible, honestly. Like when you understand these distinctions, it will come with more ease. So many people come to me like, but okay, so it says this, it says that, but what do we know what to keep and what not? So many people have the same question. And I believe understanding this, it just makes it so much easier to even explain to people, because you're able to tell them whatever was in the book of the covenant, and it remains under the order of Melchizedek, which I will speak more about it as we continue to study the book. That remains forever. But there's things, and we're going to see, which is why we see Paul so mad addressing these Galatians, because they went back to the middleman. They went back to the tutor or the schoolmaster, which is exactly what was done away with. Now let's continue. Again, we have number 2, the Most High's law, the Torah, is again the book of the covenant, right? This is the law given from Eden, lived out by Abraham, and later given in written form to Moses on Mount Sinai before the sin of the golden calf. This law is applicable yesterday, today, and forever, as stated by our Father throughout all Scripture. Then we have number 3, the Levitical priesthood law, the middleman, right? The schoolmaster. This is the law pertaining only to the priesthood of the tribe of Levi. Many laws were only to be kept by them as the priests or high priest, such as the atoning for sins through animal sacrificial system. This law is no longer under effect, as now it operates under Messiah as the eternal high priest in the order of Melchizedek, not a priest under Levi. And you see that through Hebrews 5 through 10. There's a whole study on the book of Hebrews, if you want to look into it, that I attempt to break this down step by step. So, okay. So yes, let's continue studying, and that is exactly what we're going to do right now. So now let's connect some precepts for chapter 1. We're doing really good with time. I figured book of Galatians is going to be a breeze compared to all the other studies, but I do want to take my time. I do want to take my time because I believe it's so important to understand this one letter is so popular among it's going to be so popular even amongst your family members, your pastors, your friends, whoever from your church you used to attend, you name it. They will, I promise you, they will come at you and quote from Galatians. And if you don't understand, you will fall in the trap of when I was like, Abba, what's up? Like, this make no sense with the rest of scriptures. Speak to me. But yes, let's not crucify Paul so soon. Let's study to see what he was referring to, okay? So Acts verse 1, it's basically Acts 9:6, where he was saying his introductions, right? So he, trembling and astonished, said, Adon, what you want me to do? Then the Adon said to him, arise and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. And again, this is a summary of when he had the encounter with Messiah on his way on the road to Damascus, okay? And this is the answer Messiah had given him. We have for verse 4, let me go back to it so you see what it says. It says, who gave himself for our sins that he might deliver us from this present evil age, according to the will of our Elohim and Father. So we have Matthew 20:28. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. So again, I'm just showing you in scriptures where Paul was most likely getting this from. We have also Hebrews 2:5, for he has not put the world to come, of which we speak, in subjection to the angels. And this is obviously speaking about Messiah. Now we have for verse 6, where it talks about, I marvel that you are turning away so soon from him who called you in the grace of Yasha to a different gospel. And this is the point that we're like, what different gospel is Paul talking about? What gospel were they turning to, right? We have Romans 8:28. And this is just in regards that you were called, by the way. This is just the part that it says, him who called you in the grace of Messiah, right? And we know that all things work together for good to those who love the Most High, to those who are called according to his purpose. Galatians 5:8, this persuasion does not come from him who calls you. Okay? So in other words, he who calls you will tell you and will lead you and guide you to the truth. We are always to go back to the one who called us by name, who set us apart, because if not, we are going to fall in the error of lawless people, like Peter warned the same people in Galatia, whom were preaching also a different gospel, being preached also a different gospel. We also have for verse 7, again, which is not another, the different gospel is not another, but there are some who trouble you and want to pervert the gospel of Messiah. As we still see today, nothing new under the sun, absolutely nothing new. 2 Corinthians 11:4, for if he who comes preaches another Yasha whom we have not preached, or if you receive a different spirit which you have not received, or a different gospel which you have not accepted, you may well put up with it. So again, Paul not only gives this warning to the Galatians, but he also tells the same thing to the Corinthians. Obviously, because he saw that it was something that was commonly happening, and is still, like I said, happening today. We also have Acts 15:1, speaking of the Jerusalem Council, this is where this takes place. And certain men came down from Judea and taught the brethren, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. And again, this is, yes, we're going to see that he does mention circumcision in chapter 2, which is why I believe they link that with Acts 15. But again, when you see the whole context and when you read the timeline of chapters 13 and 14 and 15, and then, you know, the differences like I had showed you before, you see that really it doesn't look like this is what he was addressing when he was speaking of this matter on chapter 2 of Galatians. We have, let me see, hold on, because I just read Acts 15:1. So we have Galatians 5:10 through 12. And this is the part where I was telling you that he makes mention in chapter 2 as well. I have confidence in you and the Adon that you will have no other mind, but he who troubles you shall bear his judgment, whoever he is. And I, brethren, if I still preach circumcision, why do I still suffer persecution? Then the offense of the cross has ceased. I could wish that those who trouble you would even cut themselves off. Ooh. And this is saying, like, you know, if they're so righteous and they're telling you to circumcise your foreskins, like, why don't they start with themselves? And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move on with the study of Galatians and where I stand with that. Not that that matters, but I will give my opinions. 2 Corinthians 2:17, for we are not, as so many, peddling the word of the Most High, but as of sincerity, but as from the Most High. We speak in the sight of Elohim in Messiah. And we also have 1 Corinthians 16:22. And again, I am quoting a lot from the same letters of Paul for a reason, because it's to see what he was saying to the rest of the churches that he was addressing to and the similarities that he was dealing with. So we have verse 8, but even if we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel to you than what we have preached to you, let him be accursed. A lot of people will use this. A lot of people have told me, like, oh, you know, it says that if you preach like a different Jesus, a different doctrine, you're going to be accursed. So be careful what you're putting out there, what you're teaching out there, yada, yada, yada. Well, what was the gospel? And what was what they were preaching, right? And that's what it all goes down to. Who's doing their they're studying, but their research, their homework, or who's following after what men are teaching, commandments of men. We have for verse 8, 1 Corinthians 16:22. I just had it. Oh, here. 16:22, yeah. If anyone does not have the Adon Yahshua HaMashiach, let him be accursed. Oh, Adon, come. So in other words, what was Paul insinuating when he said, If anyone, this thing keeps getting in the way. If anyone, again, preach any other gospel to you than what we have preached to you, let him be accursed. That gospel is not his gospel, but the gospel of our Adon, Yasha. And that is the exact same thing that he is trying to convey in this letter, that the Judaizers that were coming to them were basically stating that the work of the cross, the work of Messiah, had no effect, right? So it is a different gospel. It's definitely denying Messiah, denying Mashiach. Absolutely. Sylvie, what is it you're confused? Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat. I don't know. Let me look back.
No, I'm confused in what you're saying right now. Like, why do people, like in today's world, why, I mean, I'm getting the message that he is preaching the same thing that Messiah was here to teach. Am I getting that right?
Yeah. Paul was teaching that, right? That's what you're saying?
Paul was correct. So Paul was giving the assignment straight from Messiah. It's how this starts, right?
Exactly.
It did not come from anybody. He didn't learn that. It was given to him, right? Let's say divine mercy. Okay, and so that's what he's teaching. Why are we confused? Like, why am I confused? I'm sorry. I'm not getting it.
You're not.
What's the other teachings? Where?
Yeah, okay, so we're gonna get to that because it's gonna come in chapter 2. But the other teaching is basically they're bringing them back to the Jewish law, like or the Jewish law or the Levitical law. Let's just call it the Levitical law. Like they
Who's bringing who?
these Judaizers, it doesn't say who, but they were practicing basically Judaism. Like the Pharisees, what the Pharisees were doing.
Okay.
Let me see if I can explain it to you better. Okay, so basically Paul.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm glad you have questions because that means I'm not doing my part in explaining this well. And the whole point of this is that I want everybody to understand. So I'm glad that you're asking because just as you're not understanding, maybe others aren't either. So the whole thing was that Paul was okay. So like I said, I believe in I'm more leaning to believing the Southern Galatia theory, right? Which is a people that had some knowledge because they came from the scattered tribes of the house of Israel, right? And so let's say even if they weren't, let's say even if they were completely Gentiles, like meaning from the other nations, not anything, right? Not backtracking them back to the seed of Abraham or anything. Even if he was preaching to the other types of Galatians, right? The whole point was that these people were already believers in the faith, like they were already baptized into Messiah. So in other words, like you see at the beginning where he says, let me see here, verse 1. No, not verse 1 where he says that he called you. Let me see, where is it? Okay,
Number 6.
verse 6. I marvel that you are turning away so soon him who called you in the grace of Messiah. Okay, so we see that these people were already walking in Messiah. Do you understand? Like in other words, they understood that Messiah, now we're operating under the priesthood, the eternal priesthood of Messiah, of Mashiach, under the order of Melchizedek. So these people already understood that these laws who happened to be under the Levitical priesthood were no longer under effect because the schoolmaster, meaning the tutor, the mediator, was removed from the picture. Do you understand that part?
I do.
Okay, just want to make sure. So he's telling them these other people are coming with a different gospel. And what is that different gospel? They're basically denying Messiah. See, they want to pervert the gospel of Messiah. So they want to deny that what he did on the cross was actually what was prophesied by the prophets, was the fulfillment that was from the beginning, even within the Torah. And he's basically saying, you are not, like, by no means to reject this. Don't be bewitched. We're going to see later that he tells them in in chapter 3, I believe, it's like, who bewitched you? You know, like, what is, like, in other words, ¿quién te está embrujando? Who's like washing your, like, brainwashing you? If you already knew, you already were called by him. You, in other words, you knew him. Do you understand now? Is it more,
I do. That part I get. What I guess what I'm not getting is why is church today referring to Paul as if we're going away from the law when he's
oh,
clearly saying not doing the law.
okay. You're gonna see why later, because
I'm
unless,
like, wait,
no,
what?
because we're only on chapter 1 right now, but you're gonna see how it does get confusing. If you don't have knowledge in the word and you don't understand the distinctions between the laws that he's making reference to, you will find yourself like me questioning the whole thing. Like, oh my gosh, wait, so I'm not supposed to do Shabbat? Like, so I'm not supposed to, like, what? I'm being bewitched if I go back to, like, the commandments? Like, you know, and let me tell you, it does bring heaviness when you don't have exactly like what Peter says later to the same people, that he says, be careful, because the
Hmm.
letters that he's writing, they're hard to understand for those that are ignorant and lack knowledge in the word. And then he says that they'll twist it and leading them to err in the same era of lawless people. So you see what I'm trying to say is the same concept, is the same concept that the church is teaching today for many generations. But again, you also have to understand, Sylvie, that the majority of the people teaching today, their doctrine is based off of Paul's letters only. Yes, they may read the gospels here and there, but they don't have knowledge. Not nowadays, very few, and I mean it, like few churches are preaching from the entire Bible, from any denomination, you name it. You name it. And then we have the other extreme. We have those that reject the New Testament altogether. You know, so it's like that's why we are supposed to not only study to show ourselves approved, but to divide the word of truth, to rightly divide the word of truth. Because unless you know how to rightly divide the word of truth, you might catch yourself either rejecting one, accepting the other, or, you know, or vice versa, which is what happens to the Judaizers today, and then Christianity as a whole today on the other end. You have the Judaizers rejecting the New Testament, and then you have Christianity basically, like, they're not quote unquote rejecting it, like to say remove it from the Bibles, but they're teaching it as something that is historical. So it's one and the same thing. It's basically, as they are saying, is done away with, right? So yes, read it for historical context and whatnot, and to see the fulfillment of Messiah and whatnot, but they don't really pay mind to it. As a matter of fact, even the way they teach it is almost like there is two different gods, right? There is the God of the Old Testament, and then there's Messiah. There's Jesus in the New Testament, who came and gave us his grace and his love. And yes, all that is true. But we have to understand to rightly divide the word of truth, to combine both together and see how it all adds up to the bigger picture. Is that more clear? I felt like I talked so much. I want to make sure I'm not just yapping.
No, you're good. I'm getting it.
Okay.
I'm just like, okay, why are we like, why are they confused?
You know what it is? You have the purity of mind, which is awesome, that you did not come from any knowledge from any
Church.
yeah, any institution. So to you, it's like you see it more clearly because you've been studying from the beginning with us. You've been studying through the Torah, and you've been, you know, like, so for you, you see it's like, oh, but what is it that they're not seeing, right? But
Mm,
trust me, when you come from a knowledge of an institutionalized religion, it's hard to like, I'm telling you myself, I'm being completely honest. I was shaken when I first listened to that message that that pastor made reference to the book of Galatians, and making reference to these, obviously he was addressing like the Hebrew Israelite movement, which we know a lot of it is religion
mhm,
itself, right? And a lot of just following the letter of the law as opposed to the spirit of the law. However, I didn't even know that distinction existed. And so to me, it brought confusion, which is, like I said, and I like the fact that it did, because it did push me. At least I'm the person that I'm like, no, I need answers, Abba. I need you to speak to me, but not everyone is like that. And some people will just
mhm.
take that as the final answer, sadly. and not do their due diligence. Yes, Jessica, it's usually bits and pieces from the old, but not all of it in context. Exactly. That's what the church today teaches. But anyhow, let's continue. Where was I? Please remind me. I was verse 11. I think so. I think no. I was on verse 8 when we were covering First Corinthians. That's when, yes, I remember now. That's when you told me like what other gospel. Okay, I remember now. So we have verse 9. Let's do verse 9. So verse 9 says, as we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone preaches any other gospel to you than what you have received, let him be accursed. And we know that this let him be accursed, that comes from the Torah, actually. We're going to see that in Deuteronomy 4, verse 2. You shall not add to the word which I command you, nor take from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Adon, your Elohim, which I command you. And I think I left off a part that is set, or wasn't in Deuteronomy, or I didn't put the precept all together. Because there's one that talks about you being accursed if you do this. But yes, obviously we know Deuteronomy 28, etc., etc. We'll say it, but yes, I think I'm missing something here. But you get the idea. We also have for verse 10, for do I now persuade men or God, or do I seek to please men? For if I still pleased men, I would not be a bondservant of Messiah. And we see him saying similar things in 1 Corinthians 10:33. Just as I also please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many, that they may be saved. So we see that the only time that he seeks to please men is only for them to be saved, right? 1 Thessalonians 2:4, but as we have been approved by the Most High to be entrusted with the gospel, even so we speak, not as pleasing men, but the Most High who tests our hearts. No contradiction there. The context is basically the intent that he's putting into. In other words, he's not doing things to please men, but for the kingdom. So whenever he does things to please men, it's so that they may be saved. So he's still doing it not to please men, if you think about it, but to please the Most High. We also have for verse 11, where it says, but I make known to you, brethren, that the gospel which was preached by me is not according to men. And we know that. A lot of people will say that Paul came up with his own doctrine, because he does say my doctrine in many occasions in his letters. But we know that, again, precept upon precept, it wasn't his own doctrine. He continuously would make sure to say, Messiah gave me this doctrine. And yes, maybe mistranslations or whatever, but I do believe that when he says, makes reference to his gospel, not his doctrine, his gospel or something like that, is making reference to the one given to him by Mashiach. We see Romans 2:16. Where is Romans? Down here. In the day when Elohim will judge the secrets of men by Yeshua HaMashiach, and again, this is what I was referring to, according to my gospel. And again, it's not his gospel, but Messiah's gospel. 1 Corinthians 15:1, moreover, brethren, I declare to you the gospel which I preached to you, which also you received, and in which you stand. And again, the gospel that he preached, it was none other but Messiah's gospel. We also see it in Ephesians 3:3-5. Now, how that by revelation he made known to me the mystery, as I have briefly written already, by which when you read, you may understand my knowledge in the mystery of Messiah, which in other ages was not made known to the sons of men, as it has now been revealed by the spirit of his holy apostles and prophets. And again, he's basically saying, yes, these mysteries have been known to me, but by none other than the Ruach, than the Holy Spirit. And it's the mystery of Messiah, not his mystery, right? So I just wanted to point that out, because many will say that, oh, Paul came up with his own gospel, but we know his gospel was not according to men or himself. It was according to Messiah. And he confirms that in verse 12, if we read it. For I neither received it from men, nor was I taught it, but it came through the revelation of Yahshua HaMashiach. For you have heard of my former conduct in Judaism. Remember, I gave you guys a little bit background of Paul. Paul was a Pharisee of Pharisees, trained under Gamaliel. And then it says, how I persuaded the church of the Most High beyond measure and tried to destroy it. And we see confirmation of this. We see that in Acts 9:1, when he was still named Saul. Then Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Adon, went to the high priest. We also see Acts 8:3. As Saul, he made havoc of the church, entering every house and dragging off men and women, committing them to prison. So he was, woof, he was a feisty one. We see, so he came a long way. That was a true conversion right there. Verse 14, where it says, and I advanced in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries in my own nation, being more exceedingly zealous for the traditions of my fathers. So when he would do these things, it wasn't because he didn't believe in the Most High. No, on the contrary, it was because he was exceedingly zealous of the traditions of his fathers, which he thought, by the way, were traditions of the Most High. He was killing people in the name of the Most High. Like, he honestly, genuinely thought he was doing a holy work, right? So we see Acts 26, no, Acts 22. Did I already read this one? No, let's read this one first. Acts 22, 4-5. I persecuted this way to death, binding and delivering into prisons both men and women, as also the high priest bears me witness, and all the council of the elders, and whom I also received letters to the brethren, and went to Damascus to bring in chains even those who were there to Jerusalem to be punished. Also Acts 26:9. Indeed, I myself thought I must do many things contrary to the name of Yahshua HaMashiach. And again, because he did not believe Yahshua was the Messiah, he believed, again, that this was basically a false prophet or whatever he thought he was. But he was going after these so-called Nazarene, followers of Messiah, because he thought he was doing a great holy work. We also see that in Philippians 3:6. Concerning zeal, persecuting the church, concerning the righteousness which is in the law, blameless. And again, he's speaking there to the in the letter of Philippians about himself, like concerning zeal, he was persecuting the church, but concerning the righteousness which is in the law, he was blameless. So we see that according to the righteousness, he was blameless. Jeremiah 9:14. But they have walked according to the dictates of their own hearts, and after the Baals, which their fathers taught them. And that is exactly what Paul was doing. Exactly that. We also see Matthew 15:2. Why do your disciples transgress the traditions of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread. And again, we know this is the part in scriptures where they start saying, like, they're breaking the commandments, right? And the Messiah tells them, basically, you grab commandments of man as if they were commandments of the Most High, when they're not. They're your own traditions, right? And they neglect, actually, the actual commandments of the Most High. We also see that in Mark 7:3. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands in a special way, holding the traditions of the elders. And again, confirming these not were the Most High's commandments, but traditions of men. And that is exactly what Paul was practicing, Judaism. We also see Colossians 2:8. Beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the tradition of men, according to the basic principles of the world, and not according to Messiah. And this is another church he's addressing, but you see the same exact concept. He's basically telling them the other gospel that they're coming to tell you is based on traditions of men and not on Mashiach. So make sure that no one cheats you through philosophy and empty deceit. Again, everything the same exact thing today. I also want to add a portion from the book of Maccabees, 2nd Maccabees, Apocrypha, verse 21. This is chapter 2, verse 21. And why do I want to include this? Because we see that the same zealousy that Paul had, so did the Maccabees. Obviously, we know they were doing things for the Most High, but this is the exact thing that Paul thought he was doing. and regained possession of the temple famous throughout the world, and liberated the city and reestablished the laws that were about to be abolished, while the Adam with great kindness became gracious to them. So again, why am I reading this? Because we know the context of the book of the Maccabees is that they were Levites going into war because they were fighting for the Most High's commandments and his laws not to be abolished. They were under the Roman Empire. That's when the whole Roman Empire took over. And that's when they fought. Actually, this is why we observe or memorialize the Feast of Dedication, for those of you who don't know, because of the acts that happened in the book of Maccabees. Because of what they did, they were able to preserve the Holy Land, and Messiah had a temple to come to when he was born. However, we do see that the same zealousy that these, which they were Levites, right, possessed, is the same that Paul and the rest of the Pharisees possessed in the times of Messiah. So to them, they viewed Messiah as the opposition, as the one who was trying to come and break their laws and their principles. And we see that because even studying the book of Matthew, for example, we see that whatchamacallit, that Messiah was constantly being approached by the Pharisees, them trying to catch him breaking the law and breaking the commandments. We're later going to see Paul, or even throughout the book of Acts, we see Paul doing the Nazarite vows and things of that nature to prove that he was not without law and that he was not breaking the law. But just wanted to point that out. Let's continue. Verse 15. But when it pleased the Most High, who separated me from my mother's womb and called me through his grace. I'm just going to quote here, nothing out of this world, but wanted to call Bible verses that speak about being called from the mother's womb, because why not? We have Isaiah 49, 1 through 5. Listen, O coastlands, to me, and take heed, you peoples from afar. The Adon has called me from the womb. From the matrix of my mother, he has made mention of my name, and he has made my mouth like a sharp sword. In the shadow of his hand, he has hidden me, and made me a polished shaft. In his quiver, he has hidden me. And he said to me, you are my servant, O Israel, in whom I will be glorified. Then I said, I have labored in vain. I have spent my strength for nothing and in vain. Yet surely my just reward is with the Adon, and my work with my Elohim. And now the Adon says, who formed me from the womb to be his servant, to bring Jacob back to him, so that Israel is gathered to him. For I shall be glorious in the eyes of the Most High, and my Elohim shall be my strength. What a beautiful prophecy that goes not only to Paul, but to each and one of us whom have been called from our mother's womb. And notice that the mere purpose of being called by him is to glorify him, and not only that, but to bring Jacob back in covenant with him. And I believe wholeheartedly that that's what Paul was attempting to do, as well as us now, by doing these studies. Jeremiah 1:5, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I sanctified you. I ordained you a prophet to the nations. And perhaps we're not prophets to the nations, but for sure we are his vessels, right? Acts 9:15, but the Adon said to him, go, for he is a chosen vessel of mine to bear my name before Gentiles, kings, and the children of Israel. And this is in regards to Paul, confirming that he was indeed chosen by the Messiah, by the Most High himself. Romans 1:1, Paul, a bondservant of Yahshua HaMashiach, called to be an apostle, separated to the gospel of the Most High. This was just his introduction in the letter, but yes, we also see him making mention that he was hand selected by the Most High for this work. As well as Galatians 1:6, I marvel that you are turning away so soon from him who called you in the grace of Messiah to a different gospel. And again, we just read that, but wanted to bring that back up. We have verse 15, but when it pleased the Most High, who separated me from my mother's womb and called me through his grace to reveal his Son in me, that I might preach him among the Gentiles, I did not immediately confer with flesh and blood. Let me just read this. Nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me, but I went to Arabia and returned again to Damascus. And this is the part we were reading before, we were making reference to before, that he did not go to the disciples immediately. He actually, I believe, stayed 3 years in Arabia, right here, which interestingly, this is where Mount Sinai was. In case you didn't know, look it up in maps. And this is where he stayed for 3 years. I believe been taught directly by Mashiach. And it says after 3 years, 3 whole years, he then goes to Jerusalem. So he didn't just, it wasn't just like an immediate conversion where he was like, oh, you know, fell from the horse. Now, you know, he was blinded and now he sees, and now let me go to the disciples. No, it wasn't as simple as that. Like he's stating here, it wasn't after 3 years that he came to the disciples. And so let me just make these connections. We have 2 Corinthians 4, 5-7. For we do not preach ourselves by Yahshua HaMashiach the Adon, and ourselves your bondservants for Yahshua's sake. For it is the God who commanded light to shine out of darkness, who has shown in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of the Most High in the face of Yahshua. But we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellence of the power may be of the Most High and not of us. Nothing was from Paul, it was all from the Most High. Acts 9:15, but the Adon said to him, go, for he is a chosen vessel. We just read that one. Galatians 2:9, and when James, Cephas, and John, who seemed to be pillars, perceived the grace that had been given to me, they gave me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship, and we should go to the Gentiles and they to the circumcised. Okay, so this we're going to read now in chapter 2, but I'm just pointing out to that because that goes with the part where he says that he went then and met with the disciples. Matthew 16:17, Yahshua answered and said to him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I believe that is exactly what took place with Paul himself. Acts 9:26, and when Saul had come to Jerusalem, he tried to join the disciples, but they were all afraid of him and did not believe that he was a disciple. And remember, this took place 3 years after Paul's conversion. But they still were afraid of him because they had not really heard of him, I guess, up to that point. And we also have 1 Corinthians 9, verse 5. Do we have no right to take along a believing wife, as do also the other apostles, the brothers of the Adon and Cephas? And the Cephas we know is Peter. And the brothers of Messiah we know is James, Yaakov, and Jude. Matthew 13:55. Is this not the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary, and his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas? Reason why I quoted this is just to point out the obvious, that these were the brothers that Paul was making reference to, as well as we know they're the ones who wrote the 2 letters also in the New Testament. Acts 9:30, when the brethren found out, they brought him down to Caesarea and sent him out to Tarsus. And this, I believe, was actually before or after. I don't know. I would have to go back. After his encounter with the disciples. Yes, this goes after. This is in the same chapter 9. Sorry, I just wanted to confirm that. All right, so let's continue. We have for verse 19. Verse 20. Now concerning the things which I write to you, indeed before the Most High, I do not lie. Afterward, I went to the regions of Syria and Cilicia. Okay. So that's the part that I just read in verse 30. Okay. So, verse 22, and I was unknown by face to the churches of Judea, which were in Messiah, but they were hearing only, he who formerly persecuted us now preaches the faith which he once tried to destroy, and they glorified the Most High in me. So we see that they end up accepting him, glorifying the Most High. There's connecting precepts to that. Romans 16:7, where he talks about these other people. Greet Andronicus and Junia. Junia is a lady, by the way. My countrymen and my fellow prisoners, who are of note among the apostles, who also were in Messiah before me. And interestingly, he connects Junia and Andronicus together with the apostles. So I just wanted to point that out. Paul was never against women's ministry. We also have Acts 9:20 through 21. Immediately he preached the Messiah in the synagogues, that he is the Son of the Most High. Then all who heard were amazed and said, "Is this not he who destroyed those who called on this name on this name in Jerusalem, and has come here for that purpose, so that he might bring them bound to the chief priests?" And also we see it in Acts 8:3. As for Saul, he made havoc of the church, entering every house and dragging of men and women, committing them to prison. And lastly, connecting with that, Acts 11:18. When they heard these things, they became silent and they glorified the Most High, saying, "Then the Most High has also granted to the Gentiles repentance to life." So we conclude chapter 1 with that. If someone else could read chapter 2, I would highly appreciate it. You guys are understanding so far? Trying to see if there were comments. Anybody wants to read? Perfect, Celie. No? Then I'll read. Okay. Chapter 2. Everybody's so quiet. I would think that after so many weeks of long studies, you guys would be excited to do a short book this time. Super quiet. All right. Then after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas and also took Titus with me. And I went up by revelation and communicated to them that gospel which I preach among the Gentiles, but privately to those who were of reputation, lest by any means I might run or have run in vain. Yet not even Titus, who was with me, being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. And this is the part where I believe this gets mixed in with Acts chapter 15, as you see up here. This is exactly what I was talking about earlier. Let's continue reading. And this occurred because of false brethren secretly brought in, who came in by stealth to spy out our liberty, which we have in Messiah, that they might bring us into bondage, to whom we did not yield submission even for an hour, that the truth of the gospel might continue with you. But from those who seemed to be something, whatever they were, it makes no difference to me. Haya shows personal favoritism to no man. For those who seemed to be something added nothing to me. But on the contrary, when they saw that the gospel for the uncircumcised had been committed to me, as the gospel for the circumcised was to Peter, for he who worked effectively in Peter for the apostleship to the circumcised also worked effectively in me toward the Gentiles. And when James, Cephas, and John, who seemed to be pillars, perceived the grace that had been given to me, they gave me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship, that we should go to the Gentiles and they to the circumcised. They desired only that we should remember the poor, the very thing which I also was eager to do. So again, we see now Paul is entering in the part where people begin to get confused. I see, Yasmin. It's okay. You're doing my part tonight because it's usually me on the chat. Anyhow, what was I saying? The
I
part
Oh, sorry. I don't want to interrupt you. I actually really like that you brought up the Jewish what's it called? The Talmudic law,
Mhm.
because I feel like that really, and then how you brought up what's it called? Like the Paul's history, because I feel like it really puts things into perspective. I feel like that really opened my perspective. I'm like, oh, like when you were saying like there's more than one law, I was like, ah, so Paul isn't crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. It's again, I like to see the whole world, the whole word as a whole. Yes, even including Paul's letters, as confusing as they may sound or look, he was very, he was taught in the Torah, and I can see he was very educated. So even the way he wrote was advanced compared to
Yeah.
others, right? So I can see how many people will get all tangled up even in just his letters alone, even his style of writing alone, I mean.
And then it
Huh?
It all goes back to also when you were saying, like, if you don't know the Torah, you're never gonna understand what Paul's referring to.
That's a part.
Because you don't even know like what he studied. You don't know anything.
Exactly. So continuing, because I don't want to prolong the study. I already see that I am. I just want to. I didn't mean to interrupt you, by the way, Yasmin. I just want to cover this so we can do the connecting precepts. So this is the part that I was showing about the that he 14 years later went up again to Jerusalem, and this time with Barnabas and took Titus with him. And that's the part that it does not add up with the Jerusalem council, as quoted here. That's one of the things that does not add up to that, because we know he did not take Barnabas, nor did Titus went with him to the Jerusalem council. We also see that he met with them privately here. You see, he's saying, I went up by revelation, right? And it says that it says, and communicated to them that gospel which I preach among the Gentiles, but privately to those who were of reputation, lest by any means I might run or had run in vain. So he's literally telling you that he went and met with Paul. I mean, not Paul, sorry. Paul met with Peter and the other disciples, and it says that he met with them privately. So this does not sound like the Council of Jerusalem. That's the point I was trying to make earlier. When I did the comparison between the Galatians 2 and the Acts 15 account. We also see that, again, let me see. He talks here. Basically, there's nothing here that says that they gave him like something to do as opposed to the Acts 15 account, which is what the only thing that says here, that the only thing is that they desired that they should remember the poor, the very thing that he was also eager to do. So it does not sound like the Acts 15 account. That's all I wanted to point out with this. I do have some connecting precepts. However, I'm not going to go over all of them. I'm just going to connect the main ones. So for example, for verse 1, where it talks about that him going 14 years up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, and that he also took Titus with him, it sounds more like when he went in Acts 11 as opposed to Acts 15, where it says, then the disciples, each according to his ability, determined to send relief to the brethren dwelling in Judea. This they also did, and sent it to the elders by the hands of Barnabas and Saul. So Barnabas went up with Paul in this time that he went up to Judea, or Judea we know is also Jerusalem. So, and to me, it adds up, because if you notice at the end here, it's just telling them that we should remember the poor, which is a thing he was also eager to do. So this also sounds like it was more an Act 11 connection than an Acts 15. We see 2 Corinthians 12:2. I know a man in Messiah who 14 years ago, whether in the body I do not know, or whether out of the body I do not know, only the Most High knows, such a one was caught up to the third heaven. And this is Paul speaking of himself, of a vision that he had where he was in the throne. But he makes confirmation that 14 years ago is when he was exactly what it says here. After 14 years, I went up to Jerusalem. After 14 years. All right. Let me... Something I did want to indicate here, where it talks about, yet not even Titus, who was with me, being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. I believe the reason why was because of the bad taste that this Judaizer were leaving on these new converts, right? And however, Paul was not against circumcision, because later we see himself, and I forgot to quote it here, but we see himself taking Timothy to get circumcised. So that's the part where I wanted to add. That he is not that he was against the circumcision. It was the point of them forcing a circumcision, even on someone who is, not even understanding. It's like nowadays telling somebody to get baptized who doesn't even know why he should get baptized, right? Like, it's kind of like the same idea. But you also have to understand that circumcision is more important, the circumcision of the heart, than the outward circumcision. So, exactly. So I'm going to continue reading the second half, which you see the subtitle right there. People will read that and say, oh, you see, you guys are going back to the law. It's basically what Paul called, you are being bewitched because you're going back to the law. But like I said, this is not the Most High's law that Paul was talking about here. And let's read it. Sorry, I've spoken a lot these past few days. Now, when Peter had come to Antioch, I withstood him to his face because he was to be blamed. For before certain men came from James, he would eat with the Gentiles. But when they came, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing those who were of the circumcision. And again, we know that when he makes reference of those who were of the circumcision, it's talking about the Judaizers. It's talking about those who were, yes, keeping the laws, but the circumcision is the distinction between you are Jewish or you are a Gentile. Let's continue. Verse 13. And the rest of the Jews also played the hypocrite with him, so that even Barnabas was carried away with their hypocrisy. But when I saw that they were not straightforward about the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter before them all, if you, being a Jew, live in the manner of the Gentiles and not as the Jews, why do you compel Gentiles to live as Jews? We who are Jews by nature and not sinners of the Gentiles, knowing that a man is not justified, the context of this whole book, by the works of the law, but by faith in Yahshua HaMashiach. Even we have believed in Messiah, that we might be justified by faith in Messiah and not by the works of the law. For by the works of the law, no flesh shall be justified. But if while we seek to be justified by Messiah, we ourselves also are found sinners, is Messiah therefore a minister of sin? Certainly not. For if I build again those things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor. For I through the law died to the law, that I might live to the Most High. I have been crucified with Messiah. It is no longer I who live, but Messiah lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live in faith. I live by faith in the Son of the Most High, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not set aside the grace of the Most High, for if righteousness comes through the law, then Messiah died in vain. And again, distinctions of this word play here is key. I want to say the following. The first thing I want to point out here is that he gets in Peter's case because of the fact that we know that Peter was already told by the Most High to not call those that were considered by others unclean, to call them unclean if the Most High had called them. And so we see that Peter, it says here on verse 14, when I saw that they were not straightforward about the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter before them all, so not in private, but he called them out, if you being a Jew live in the manner of Gentiles and not as the Jews, why do you compel Gentiles to live as Jews? And we see here that he is correcting him, because what apparently was happening was that Peter, out of fear of men, which we know that could have been the case because Peter was the same Peter that denied Messiah 3 times. Why? Out of fear, right? Out of fear. So obviously we know that he at this point had been transformed and whatnot, but we know these men, though they were righteous, had imperfections. And I do believe that Peter was feeling certain type of way around these Judaizer, like maybe he didn't want them to think like that they weren't keeping the law or whatever. And instead of just telling them straightforward, he was just acting as they were acting. Like, in other words, he wasn't sitting with, let's say, Cornelius, who was a Gentile, in the same table, which, by the way, there's no command within Torah that says not to do that. No commandment. This was traditions of men, which is why Paul felt compelled to address it. And again, and he goes deep into we're not justified by the works of the law. We're not. The law itself cannot bless us or curse us. The law is a witness. What curses or blesses us is our obedience or disobedience thereof, right? But we have to understand something, that even obeying the law itself does not save us. We are justified by faith alone. We know that in the order of Melchizedek, okay, Abraham was accounted righteous because he believed. Yes, we know that he kept all of the commandments. It states as well in the book of Genesis. However, we see that he was counted righteous for he believed. So we are justified by our faith, not by our works. And James states this as well. We see later that, so basically what we see is in Mount Sinai, right before the sin of the golden calf, the Most High gives the commandments to Moses, right? And he reiterates them to the people, and they say, everything you said, we will do. In other words, this act over and that part was by faith. They believed it and they agreed upon it. After the sin of the golden calf came the disobedience, right? And came the breaking of the covenant, which was blood ratified. It was not to be ever broken. And so now, again, we need the mediator. We need the Levitical priesthood to mediate for man. However, we know that even that in itself could not save the people. Even by doing all the atonement, even by doing and keeping all of the commandments, even by wearing the tzitzis to remember the commandments. And that is something else, guys. Understand, like, for example, circumcision. Circumcision was a sign of the covenant for Abraham and his seed, right? The sign of the covenant was ratified on Mount Sinai when they said, I do. To all of these things, I do. But that covenant, which had the seal of the physical circumcision, was broken. You guys are understanding? It was broken. Now he has to add another seal, another sign, outward sign to them. Notice how the people in the wilderness were not circumcised, not even the Levites. While they were in the wilderness, what did they do instead? They wore tzitzis as a reminder to them to keep these laws, right? It wasn't until they entered the promised land that they circumcised themselves to enter the promised land. And again, I believe another sign in order to enter into the covenant once again. But I don't know if you guys are following me with this. It was never the works of the law. It was not even the outward sign of circumcision, but the circumcision of the hearts, because that's the one that is done by faith. Are y'all with me? Let me see the chat. I saw somebody writing.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let me just show you in regards to, let me see which one I wanted to show. In regards to verse 16. Yes. Verse 16. Sorry, I'm skipping a lot of these. Acts 13, verse 38. Did I skip it? Oh, here it is. Therefore, let it be known to you, brethren, that through this man is preached to you forgiveness of sins, and by him everyone who believes is justified from all things from which you could not be justified by the law of Moses, which we know is the Most High's law through Moses, but it still did not justify us. Are you understanding what I'm saying? It is only faith alone that justifies us, not even the law. We see in Galatians 3:11, but that no one is justified by the law in the sight of the Most High is evident, for the just shall live by what? By faith. Romans 1:17, and again, and this is being quoted from Habakkuk. Romans 1:17, for in the righteousness of the Most High is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. I guess Paul really liked Habakkuk. He quotes him over and over. We have Psalms 143, verse 2, do not enter into judgment with your servant, for in your sight no one living is righteous. No one. No one. I want to point out, so this Psalms that I'm about to read, I want to show it to you in the plain Masoretic, and then I'm going to read it from the Septuagint, so you see the addition that it adds. So Psalms 142 verse 2, it just says, I pour out my complaint before him, I declare before him my trouble, right? In the Septuagint, the same Psalms, verse 2, it says, and enter not into judgment with thy servants, for in thy sight shall no man living be justified. So I just wanted to point that out. I thought that was a good connection there to what I'm trying to point out. And again, Romans 3:20, therefore by the deeds of the law, no flesh will be justified in his sight. For by the law is the knowledge of sin. And again, the law, its purpose is basically a witness unto us, which is why there is a book of the law. That, and again, the book of the covenant was given before the sin of the golden calf. The book of the law was given as a witness because of the transgressions, which is why I believe is the knowledge of sin. We also see in 1 John 3:8, he who sins is of the devil, for the devil has sinned from the beginning. For this purpose, the Son of the Most High was manifested that he might destroy the works of the devil. And again, we know that the law is the transgression of, sin, is a transgression of the law. But keeping the law itself does not justify you and make you righteous. It just sanctifies you when you do it inwardly. Because again, and people will say, but no, what are you saying? Pharisees were keeping the laws. Yes, we know a lot of them were commandments of men, but they were also keeping the Shabbats. They were also eating kosher, eating clean, right? So don't tell me that just keeping the law by itself is what's going to save you. It's not. It's what's going to help you stay set apart. Romans 8:2, for the law of the Spirit of life in Messiah has made me free from the law of sin and death. And this is the point where I go back and say there's many different types of laws that Paul makes reference to. The law of sin and death, we know, has to go back to the law that was with the mediator, that had to do with the Levitical priesthood, that had to do with the written commandments because of the law that entered for infidelity, for us breaking his covenant, for being the unfaithful bride, which was the same law of sin and death in the book of Numbers for the unfaithful woman. Just wanted to point that out. Romans 6:1-2, and then 14. What shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? Certainly not. How shall we who died to sin live any longer in it? For sin shall not have dominion over you. For you are not under the law, but under grace. And that is one that people love to use. Like, you're not under the law, you're under grace, you're under grace. Not understanding what you are under is a schoolmaster that keeps you bound to a priesthood that is no longer under effect. It keeps you under a law of atoning, using animal atonement to atone for your sins, which we know it could have never atoned for our sins. Only Messiah's blood could. You see throughout the book of Leviticus that every day there was a sacrifice being done for the people. Every single day there were multiple sacrifices because the blood could only cover the sin. It could not cleanse us. Only Messiah could cleanse us, which is why we're under grace, because he extended his grace for us now to be saved. Romans 7:4, therefore, my brethren, you also have become dead to the law through the body of Messiah, that you may be married to another, to who was raised from the dead, that we should bear fruit to the Most High. And again, dead to the law, Levitical priesthood, and married to another, because now we're entering into the same covenant that the book of Hebrews makes mention to, the covenant under the order of Melchizedek, which is the same one that is forever, the book of the covenant that is eternal. We're not married to the schoolmaster, but married to our Savior Mashiach. He is the bridegroom. Are you guys understanding Paul's letter a little bit better? I hope so. I hope so. 1 Corinthians 9:20 through 21. And to the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, not being without law toward the Most High, but under law toward Messiah, that I might win those who are without law. And this one is always one that is confusing, because people will be like, what do you mean you're without law? He was basically telling you, in other words, depends who I'm with. If I am with a Jew, I'm gonna act like the Jews act in order to win them. In other words, not act like them, but like, okay, let's, you guys have tzitzis, let's put on the tzitzis. Let's do this. Let's show these things so I can persuade them, right? And then it says those that are not under the law, I'm gonna approach them as not under the law. But interestingly, he makes a distinction that not without the law toward the Most High. So he was never without the law of the Most High, but under the law toward Messiah, because we know that difference here is the law that is no longer under the Levitical order. Does that make sense now? Does that make sense now? Let me see what else, because I don't want to go through these two. It's just going to basically restate everything over and over again. But I wanted to just make sure you guys understand the distinctions. Let me see. Okay. This part in verse 19, where it says, for I through the law died to the law that I might live to God, is basically what I just read, confirming what he was stating in Romans, right? I do have, let me read Ephesians. I'm gonna skip through this one. I did want to point out, I mean, we're going to get to this eventually, but I do want to point out that those that are walking according to his law, the book of the covenant, will manifest the fruit of the Spirit, because the law is now inscribed in your hearts, right? That is technically what being born again means. Having his law, his perfect instructions written in your heart, and that goes with the circumcision of the heart, right? So we know that when we are in Messiah, we're crucified with him, and with it the flesh and its passions and its desires. If the flesh is not crucified, then you're not walking in the Ruach, which is what happens so often. You have people telling you, oh, I'm keeping commandments, I'm doing this, I'm keeping Shabbats, I'm doing all these things, yet you see more the works of the flesh being evident in them. Even the way they speak. I was telling the girls this Tuesday, when we were studying Matthew, how it's so obvious when what's in the heart, which the heart connects to the mind, is one and the same. What's in your mind, what's in your heart, will manifest outwardly through your lips. It just comes out. You don't sometimes have to show it much. Maybe not right away, you might not spot it, but with time you see it. And you see the fleshly passions, the fleshly desires, even how you act things out, like how you do things certain ways. You could see the pride in people. And it's sad to see it. It's sad to see it in a community of believers that are specifically keeping Torah, keeping commandments, but you see the flesh manifested more than the fruits of the Spirit. And that to me just shows, and usually these are the same people going after Paul, But again, I believe that it's not to defend Paul or not defend Paul. Again, Paul was just another man, just another vessel. But let's study in context and see what was it that Paul was referring to. That's the only thing I am trying to reiterate over and over again. Because going back to things that we no longer have to do, and even things that we have to do, but then you're still showing fleshly desires and fleshly actions, it speaks higher than your commandments and your tzitzis. So I'm just saying that. Romans 6:8 through 11. I'm going to write it. Now, if we died with Messiah, we believe that we shall also live with him, knowing that Messiah having been raised from the dead, dies no more. Death no longer has dominion over him. For the death that he died to sin once for all. But the life that he lives to the Most High. Likewise, you also reckon yourselves to be dead indeed to sin, the transgression of the law, but alive to the Most High in Yahshua HaMashiach. I'm telling you, I have so many scriptures from Paul's letters that just add to this. It's a lot. Ephesians 2:4-6, but the Most High, who is rich in mercy because of his great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in trespasses, made us alive together with Messiah, even when we were dead in trespasses. In other words, we were not justified because we were keeping commandments. Even when we were dead in trespasses, he made us alive together with Mashiach. By grace you have been saved, and raised us up together and made us sit together in the heavenly places in Yahshua HaMashiach. The difference is now that when you are seated with him in heavenly places and walking together in a new life, you will bear the fruits of the Ruach, which will lead you right back to keeping his covenant and following his commandments. Colossians 3:1-4. If then you were raised with Messiah, seek those things which are above, where Messiah is, sitting at the right hand of the Most High. Again, seek the things which are above, not below, but above. The things of this earth is, sorry, I'm gonna say it, it's caca. Seek the things from above, even the things that don't seem that bad to us, that the Most High gives us permission to allow, like going on vacations and whatnot. It's still garbage. Focus on the things of above. Set your mind on things above, not on things of the earth. For you died and your life is hidden with Messiah. When Messiah, who is our life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. And that's the most beautiful promise. Isaiah 53:12. Therefore, I will divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul unto death, and he was numbered with the transgressors. And he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressions. Again, because it was by grace. It was by grace. And this is a prophecy by Isaiah, by the way. But we see that he made intercession for the transgressors. He bore their sin. Yes, even before they were keeping commandments. And that's the part I want you guys to understand. That's exactly why Paul got so mad at these Judaizers bewitching the Galatians, and even mad at Peter at one point for being hypocritical. Let's just say that's what he was doing, because obviously we know Peter did not believe that was the case, but he was, I guess, taming the waters or avoiding conflict, right? Ephesians 5:2. And walk in love as Messiah also has loved us and given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to the Most High for a sweet smelling aroma. He was the lamb that was slain for us, our Passover lamb. He was the offering, the ultimate sacrifice, right? Hebrews 7:11. Therefore, if perfection were through the Levitical priesthood, for under if the people received the law, which is what I was making reference over and over again about, this is what it means to when the word refers to the book of the law, right? What further need was there that another priest should arise according to the order of Melchizedek, and not be called according to the order of Aaron? And again, and this is clear time and time again, that we are not to follow after these things, because if not, Messiah died in vain. Messiah did not die in vain. There is, and I will probably go more over the next study when we do the next two chapters, because I know it will be a little bit shorter than tonight since it won't need an introduction. But I do want to point out to you guys the difference more clearly in case anyone has any doubts. And I have completely forgot to check the chat. Oh my goodness. I don't know where I need to go back to. Ooh. Okay, I'll catch up later because I want to end the recording. But what I was going to say is I want to make sure that everyone understands the distinction. That is not to say that I am, how do I say this? That I am saying that we're not to keep the law, or that I am saying, I don't want people to confuse my words, and I want my words to not be my words, but to be his words, which come from the word, which is what I'm going to try to point out to you ladies as the weeks go on in this study, so we can all together learn, because I am learning in this journey as well, learning so much more this time around. And I am very humbled to be able to see, like, what was it that Paul so much was saying to Timothy to learn how to rightly divide the word of truth. We see so much, and with this I'm going to end the recording. We see so much, sadly, nowadays, the two extremes in the church, in the body of Messiah. We see those that are going to the extreme of being Judaizers, that you feel certain type of way even around them, because you feel so judged by them constantly, whether your tzitzis are longer than the others, whether women should wear and men not, whether you should all wear, whether you mix milk and chicken or whatever, or it just feels like burdensome at one point, right, or another. And then you have the other extreme with the Christianity as a whole, where they completely do away with the Torah and the Tanakh altogether. And, we're saved by grace. We don't have to do anything, or we do, but not that, we just love him and love our neighbor. Everything else is kooky. You know what I mean? So no, you have the two extremes, and we have to rightly divide the word of truth to tackle that, so that we don't fall in the same mistakes and in the same error of being a lawless people, because regardless, both are acting lawlessly, if you think about it, because adding to the word is lawlessness. And I just want to say this. When I first and I'm going to end with saying this, actually. When I first started this walk, understanding that the commandments are not done away with, his Torah is forever, I at the beginning was so passionate. I still am, don't get me wrong. I actually am more passionate now, I want to say. I am. But passionate in the sense that I wanted to do it all. Like, I'm like, what does it say to do? Drop this like it's hot, throw this away, this yes, this no, whatever, But I did catch myself, thankfully, and all praises to Abba who caught me just in time. I did catch myself flirting with a fine line of being like a Pharisee, of being legalistic. And I say this because it's so easy to go in that fine line when you don't know how to divide the word of truth. And I think it's so important not to stop, like I think I saw Yasmin say, or Jessica, not to stop intimacy with Abba, not to stop prayer, not to stop searching out in worship, not only in word, because you need both to stay alive, to feed the Ruach HaKodesh within you. Remember, the letter alone, it kills if it's without the Ruach. And that's the problem, that a lot of people will go so deep on the Torah that it's all law, 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 law. They forget the spirit of the law. There is a letter of the law, and there's a spirit of the law. And the spirit of the law will lead you back to Yasha, will lead you back to the Melchizedek priesthood, will lead you back to it all, and will lead you to show the fruit of the Spirit. It will lead you to show the fruits of the Spirit. It's not going to keep you contained. Oh, I can't be seen with these people, because you're going to sound just like the Judaizers that Paul was addressing in this book. You're going to sound just like them, which he refers again in chapter 1 as another gospel, which is not Mashiach's gospel. It is not Mashiach's gospel. So I wanted to end with that. I hope I spoke clearly, that everyone was able to understand. I feel like I yapped so much. I do apologize ahead of time for that. But I'm trying to, like I said, I felt the urgency to put this out there, not only in lives, but also in recordings, because I once was edified with this revelation of Paul's letters, right? And what they truly meant. So I pray that it does the same to you guys, and that your fire grows for him, that your fire grows, do not contain his Holy Spirit. Do not let your faith die down. A lot of these Judaizers nowadays, they don't have faith. It's just works. They may say it's faith plus works, but you just see the works. Remember, we need both. Don't let your faith die down. Your faith, your works is proof of your faith, right? That's why a lot of the works that you see out there just look like dead works. I'm just going to say that. And with that, we conclude this study for tonight. I pray not only that it bless you, but that you feel encouraged to connect next week to continue, and then the following week to just finish the entire book to the Galatians and gain understanding together. May Abba Baruch you. Have a blessed evening. Shalom.